The boy set the enamel bowl down on the old man's step at 5:40 in the morning, the same as he had for 406 mornings, and then he stepped back 3 paces and waited. Because he had learned that the old man did not like to be watched while he found the rim with his fingers. The bowl held rice and 1 piece of fish. The boy had eaten nothing. Behind him the compound was still dark, and somewhere near the water tank a woman was already scraping the bottom of a pot with a spoon, and the sound carried the way sounds carry before the sun comes up. The old man's hand went out, found the warmth, and stopped there. The boy turned to go. "Quadwu," the old man said. It was the first time in 406 mornings that the old man had used his name. Quadwo did not know how the blind man had learned it. But 3 streets away, in a house with a gate, 4 men had been awake since 3 in the morning, arguing about a chair that had been empty for 11 years, and one of them had just said the same name out loud. Quadwo Osai was 14 years old and weighed 91 pounds, which was 11 pounds less than he had weighed at 12, because for 2 years he had been dividing what he cooked into 2 portions and calling the smaller one his own. He had been an orphan since he was 6. His mother had died in the Harmattan season of a cough that started in November and finished in February, and his father had gone to Tima to work on the motorway and had not come back, and nobody in the compound at number 14 Judah Lane had ever said out loud whether that meant he was dead or whether it meant something worse, which is that he was alive and had made a decision. He wore a gray school shirt with the collar turned twice because the outer layer had gone soft and yellow and the inner layer had not. He had bought it for 4 setties at Makola Market from a woman who sold clothing by weight. It was clean. He washed it every second night in a plastic basin behind the kitchen block and hung it inside so nobody would see it hanging and know he owned one. On the mornings it had not dried, he wore it wet and let the walk to the standpipe dry it. He kept a wooden spoon. The handle had been sanded down by his mother's palm until it was thinner in the middle than at either end, and there was a crack running along the grain that he had bound with fishing line in the 3rd year, and he did not stir with any other spoon even when other spoons were closer. He cooked with it every morning. He carried it in his waistband the rest of the day. He was 14 years old, and he owned one object in the world, and it was a spoon that fit a dead woman's hand better than it fit his own. He wanted to eat twice in one day. That was the whole of it. Not to be rich, not to be free, not to leave Judah Lane. He wanted to sit down one evening and eat a second time and not have to decide who lost that food in order for him to have it. He had wanted this for 2 years, and he had never once arranged it, because every time he came close, the old man's step was empty in the morning, and he understood what an empty step means to a man who cannot see who is coming. The old man was called Dubem, and everybody said he had been blind for 11 years, and nobody said how. He lived at the end of Judah Lane in a room with a green door and a bench outside it. He did not beg. He sat. Children were warned away from him, not because he had done anything, but because a blind man who does not beg makes people uneasy in a way they cannot explain, and therefore explain badly. Quadwo had started cooking for him on a Tuesday in the rainy season after he saw a woman set a bowl on the step, and then, when the old man's hand went toward it, pull it back 6 inches so the hand closed on nothing, and laugh and walk away. Quadwo had not said anything to the woman. He had gone home and cooked and come back at 5:40 the next morning and set the bowl down and stepped back 3 paces, and he had done that every morning since, and he had never once told anyone he was doing it. The compound at number 14 was owned by a man named Obina Ndukwe, who collected rent on the 1st of the month and on the 2nd if the 1st was a Sunday. He did not shout at anyone. He was a man with a ledger. In the ledger, Quadwo occupied a single line, room 6, minor no guarantor, arrears 62 cedis. Obina had inherited the compound and the ledger from his father, and he ran both exactly the way they had been handed to him, and when people said he was hard, he was genuinely puzzled, because he had never invented a single rule. He only enforced them. That is a different thing, and it is worse, and it is what makes a compound run. He wore a lilac shirt on collection days, and he smelled of hand sanitizer and peppermint gum. He looked at the floor of a room before he looked at the face of the person standing in it. On the 14th of the month, he stood in the doorway of room 6 and told Quado he had 11 days. He did not raise his voice. He said that a boy of 14 with no guarantor was not a tenant. He was a risk. And that the room could bring in 90 cedis from a trader who sold sachet water. And that he was sorry. And that he had waited longer than his father would have. Then he wrote something in the ledger with a pen that he clicked twice before writing, and he left. There were 4 adults standing in the yard while he said it. Mama Adaize, who sold fried yam at the corner, stood at her stall and did not move. 2 men who worked at the timber yard looked at the tap. And a woman named Blessing, who had lived in the compound for 9 years and who had borrowed salt from Quadwo 11 times, went inside her room and closed her door, and the sound the door made was the loudest sound in the yard that afternoon. Quadwo tried. That is the part that matters. He did not sit down in the room and wait for the 11th day. He went to the timber yard on Beatty's Ford Road and asked for work, and was told he was too small for the lifting and too young for the saw. And he stood there long enough that the foreman looked up a second time and said it again more slowly. He went to Mama Adaize and asked if he could fry for her and keep a third, and she said her sister's son was coming from Kumasi in 2 weeks. He went to the church on Judah Street on a Wednesday and sat through a service he did not follow, and waited to speak to the pastor, and was told the pastor had gone to a burial in Enugu. By the 9th day, he had made 18 cedis. He needed 62. He counted the coins on the floor of room 6 by the light of the doorway, because the bulb had gone and he had not replaced it. 18 cedis and 40 pesewas. He counted them a second time. Then he separated out enough for rice and put the rest back into the sock, and then he sat with the sock in his hand for a while, and then he took out the rice money again and looked at it, and put it back, and did not cook that night, and cooked the next morning at 5:20 anyway, because the old man's step could not be empty on the 10th day of all days, when the boy might not be there on the 12th. It rained on the 10th day. It came down on Judah Lane the way it comes down in July, in one piece, like a sheet being dropped, and the gutter at the corner filled and turned and carried a plastic bag and a slipper and the label off a tin toward the drain. Quado walked to the standpipe with the basin on his head, and the rain came through the gray shirt in 11 seconds, and after that it did not matter. The concrete under his feet was cold and slick. He could smell the drain and wet dust, and from somewhere, coal pot smoke that had not yet gone out, and he could hear the rain on the roofing sheets, which is a sound like gravel poured from a height. And under it, very faint, the sound of Blessing's radio through a closed door. He was carrying the basin back when Mama Adaize came out from under her tarpaulin with a mug and put it in his hands. Ginger tea. He had not eaten since the previous morning, and it went down and sat in him and warmed a space about the size of a fist. She did not say anything about the rent. She said, "Your mother used to fold her cloth like that, slowly, like it was worth something." Then she said, "The old man at the end." Dubem. She looked at the water going down the lane. He was not always blind, and he was not always at the end of this lane. She went back under the tarpaulin. Kwadwo drank the tea standing in the rain and did not ask her what she meant. Because he was 14, and because there is a kind of tiredness in which a person stops asking the questions that would save them. On the 11th morning he set the bowl down at 5:40, and Debem said, "Sit." Kwadwo sat on the ground beside the step. It was the first time. The old man ate slowly, and when he had finished he put his hand flat on the enamel and said, 406 days. You use a wooden spoon. It is cracked, and you have tied it. You taste the salt before you take the pot from the fire, not after. And you eat after me. He turned his face toward the boy, and the boy realized that a blind man had been counting, and had been listening to a spoon, and had known for a long time. Come at 6 tomorrow, Debem said. Not 5:40. 6. And that would have been enough. That was, in fact, the moment where the story should have turned, and where Kwadwo let himself believe it had, because he walked back to room 6 lighter than he had been in 11 days. But at noon Obinna came with the locksmith. He came a day early because the trader who sold sachet water had money on a Thursday and not on a Friday, and Obinna did not think of this as breaking his word. He thought of it as a Thursday. The locksmith did not make eye contact. He knelt at the door of room 6 and worked, and Kwadwo stood behind him holding the wooden spoon and a sock with 18 sedis and 40 pasewas in it. And Obinna stood in the yard and looked at the floor and clicked his pen twice. It took 9 minutes. When it was done, Kwadwo asked, quietly, without begging, whether he could take the basin. Obinna said the basin was in the room, and the room was closed. Then he wrote in the ledger and turned the page, and the page turning was the end of it. Kwadwo walked to the end of Judah Lane and sat on the ground near the green door, and did not knock, because it was not 6 o'clock in the morning, and because he did not know how to say what had happened without it sounding like asking. He was still there at dusk when the old man opened the door and said his name, and told him to come inside. The room had 1 bench, 1 mat, 1 shelf, and 11 books with cloth covers that no one had opened in 11 years. Debem gave him water. Then he said, "Tell me what you cooked on the first day." Kwadwo said rice and 1 piece of fish. And the second, rice and 1 piece of fish. And on the day it rained in November, when the gas finished. Kwadwo stopped. He had cooked on a coal pot in the doorway that day with borrowed charcoal, and it had taken 2 hours, and he had come at 7 and not at 5:40, and he had never mentioned it, and no one had seen him do it, because he had done it inside room 6 with the door half shut. "You were late," Debem said. "I was worried." He said it in the flat way of a man reading a receipt. "Now, bring your spoon here." Kwadwo put it in his hand. The old man's thumb went along the handle, found the thinness in the middle where a woman's palm had worn it, found the crack, found the fishing line, wound 4 times and knotted twice. He held it for a long moment. "Who tied this?" he said. "I did." "Who taught you to tie it like this? 4 turns, 2 knots, not 3. My mother." "What was your mother's name?" "Nia. Nia Ose." The old man did not move. Outside, a bus groaned past the top of the lane, and the sound went away and did not come back, and in the silence that it left, Debem said, "And her mother. Do you know her mother's name?" Kwadwo said that his grandmother had been called Obinna, and that she had cooked for a big house before he was born, and that she had died before he could remember her face, and that his mother had said only that she had left that house on a Tuesday and had never told anyone why. Debem stood up. He went to the shelf and put his fingers on the spines of the 11 books, counting, and stopped at the 4th, and took out from inside it a folded paper that had gone the color of weak tea. He held it out toward the middle of the room, toward nothing, because he could not see where the boy was. "I have been waiting for a hand I recognized," he said. 11 years. Not a face. I cannot use a face. He put the paper into Quadwo's hands, and what was on that paper is the reason 4 men 3 streets away had been awake since 3 in the morning. Quadwo could read. His mother had made sure of it. He read it twice, and the second time his hands were not steady, and he asked the old man what it meant, and Dubem told him. The house with the gate 3 streets away had belonged to Dubem's family for 61 years, and Dubem was the eldest of it, and he had been the head of it. And 11 years ago, there had been a fire in the storeroom at the back, and Dubem had gone in for a box of documents, and had come out with the box, and without his sight. He had signed nothing while he was in the hospital, though his younger brother had brought papers on 3 separate afternoons. When he came home, the house had a new lock. His brother had said, with real tenderness, that a blind man could not hold a family, and that he would hold it for him, and had walked him to a room at the end of Judah Lane and paid the rent on it for 4 months, and then stopped. Nobody in that house had known what was in the box, because the only person who had ever gone into the storeroom was the woman who cooked there. She had put it behind the flour in 1986. Her name was Abina. On a Tuesday, she had come to Dubem's father in the yard and told him what she had seen a man doing with the land papers, and Dubem's father had told her to hide the true copies where nobody would look, and to say nothing to anyone, and to leave for her own safety, and never to come back. And she had left, and she had never come back, and she had never told her daughter why, and her daughter had never told her son. The paper in Quadwo's hand was the deed. It named the house, and it named the land, and it named the line of inheritance, and at the bottom, in the space for the witness, in the small, careful hand of a woman who had been taught to write late and had never stopped being proud of it, was the name Abena Osai. They have called a meeting for tomorrow, Dubem said, to sign the sale. They have been trying for 11 years and they cannot, because the true copy is not in that house. Tomorrow they will sign a sworn statement that it was lost. He turned toward the sound of the boy's breathing. You will come with me at 6 in the morning, not 5:40. 6. And you will bring your spoon. They walked 3 streets. The old man's hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy's shirt washed the night before in a plastic basin behind a kitchen block he no longer had a key to. The gate was open because there were cars in the yard. There were 11 people in the front room, and a lawyer, and a table, and on the table a document with a red seal, and a chair at the head of the table that nobody was sitting in. Dubem's brother, a heavy man in a white agbada with a phone in his left hand, was speaking. He stopped when the room went quiet, and he turned, and he saw an old blind man in a doorway with a 14-year-old boy beside him. Nobody laughed. That is the thing about a room like that. Everybody in it knows the difference between a beggar and something else, and they know it before their minds do, and their bodies move first. The lawyer stood up. A woman near the window took her hand off the back of the empty chair. 2 men who had been sitting were now not sitting, and could not have said when they had decided to rise. Dubem walked into the room. He did not put his hand out to find the furniture. He had lived in that room for 50 years, and he knew where every piece of it stood, and he crossed it as a man crosses a room he owns, and he stopped behind the empty chair at the head of the table and put both hands on it. Sit down, he said. The brother sat down. The lawyer said something about a procedure and about notice and about the fact that a document could not simply be produced. Dubem did not answer him. He said, Quadwo, the boy put the deed on the table, face up, and stepped back 3 paces, because it was what he knew how to do. The lawyer read it. He read it standing. When he got to the bottom, he stopped, and he put 1 finger on the witness line, and he did not lift the finger for a long time. Dubem said, Read the name. The lawyer read it. Abena Osei. Her grandson cooked for me every morning for 406 days, Dubem said, and never once told me his name, and never once asked me for anything, and never once ate before I did. He turned his blind face down the length of the table toward his brother. You said a man who cannot see cannot hold a family. He let the room hold that. You were wrong about the seeing, he said. You were wrong about the family. The brother's hand moved across the table toward the document with the red seal and stopped halfway and came back and lay flat on the wood. He did not shout. He looked at the phone in his left hand as though it had rung. The woman by the window sat down without looking at the chair. Someone at the back of the room walked out into the yard and stood there. What happened afterward took 4 months, and it was not dramatic, and Dubem never once raised his voice through any of it. The deed was lodged. The sale did not proceed. The brother was not sent to prison, and Dubem did not ask for it, and the family did not speak of it, which, in a family, is heavier. The house was placed into a trust with a written instrument that could not be undone by any single signature, so that no blind man and no orphan and no woman who cooks in a storeroom would ever again be standing outside a lock while people inside decided what they were worth. And in the document that created it, in the space for the second name, where the law required a witness who would outlive the men in that room, the lawyer wrote Kwadwo Ose, aged 14. And the small thing, the thing that only 3 people ever noticed. A compound at number 14 Judah Lane changed hands that year, and the new instrument that governed it had one clause that had never been in Obina's father's ledger, that no tenant under the age of 18 could be removed from a room for arrears without a hearing. Obina kept his position. He was made to read the clause aloud at the first hearing, which was held in the yard at number 14, standing on the spot where a locksmith had once knelt for 9 minutes while 4 adults looked at a tap. Obina Ndukwe thought he had put a boy out of a room, but what he had actually done was send a 14-year-old to sit on the ground outside a green door at the exact hour when an old man had finally decided to open it, carrying the one object he owned in the world, tied with 4 turns and 2 knots by a woman who was taught the knot by a woman who had hidden a deed behind a sack of flour in 1986 and had gone to her grave without ever explaining why. He did not take anything from that boy. He could not. What that boy carried was not in the room. You can put a person out. You can change the lock and turn the page in the ledger and click the pen twice and go home and eat, and never once think you have done anything but follow a rule. But you cannot reach inside a person and take out the hands they were given, or the way they were taught to tie a knot, or the 406 mornings they got up in the dark for someone who could never see them do it. Those are not possessions. Nobody has ever found the lock for them. Kwadwo Osai is 19 now. He gets up at 4:30. He cooks in a kitchen with a gas ring and a window, and the first bowl still goes to a bench outside a green door, because the old man refused to move house and Kwadwo refused to argue, and so a car goes down Judah Lane every morning at 10 to 6, and a young man gets out with an enamel bowl and sets it down and steps back 3 paces. He stirs with a wooden spoon that has been rebound twice. He eats second. He has never in his life eaten first, and he has been told he can now, and he has heard that, and he has decided. If a man had nothing to give you, and could not see you, and could not even thank you by name, would you still cook for him 406 times? Or would you stop on the day you found out he had nothing? Be honest. Not with me, with yourself. Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.